Imagine you've just landed at Toronto Pearson International Airport. You've spent months, perhaps years, looking at the rankings. You've seen the glossy brochures of turquoise glacial lakes, the serene pictures of friendly Mounties in red surge, and the viral videos of a prime minister talking about sunny ways and diversity being our strength. You've been told that Canada is the better version of North America, the one with the soul, the safety net, and the politeness that American capitalism supposedly threw in the trash decades ago. You think you're entering a wealthy G7 superpower, a sanctuary of the middle class, where peace, order, and good government aren't just slogans, but a way of life. But as you step into the humid air of the Greater Toronto Area, or the biting dry wind of a Calgary winter, you're about to realize you've been sold a magnificent multi-decade illusion. You aren't entering a vibrant, growing economy of the future. You are stepping into a country that is quietly, politely, and steadily cannibalizing its own future. You are entering a nation that has stopped building, stopped innovating, and started treating its own citizens as captive assets in a giant national real estate fund. The maple syrup is still sweet, but the economics, they are terrifying. Canada is currently undergoing a transformation that defies logic. It is a country with the most land on Earth per capita, yet it has a housing shortage so acute it borders on a human rights crisis. It is a country that prides itself on free health care, while its citizens are offered state-sanctioned suicide because they can't afford their rent. It is a nation that has stopped producing innovators and started producing landlords. Welcome to the reality of the Canadian decline. Here is why Canada is poorer, more broken, and more of an economic trap than you ever thought possible. Let's start with the first and most obvious symptom of the rot, the housing narcotic. Imagine you're a young Canadian professional. You did everything right. You got the engineering degree, you work 45 hours a week, and you've saved up $50,000. In any other decade, or in almost any other country with this much land, you'd be a success story. In Canada, you are a ghost. You open a real estate app and see a 500-square-foot condo in a suburb an hour away from your job. The price? $750,000. The condo fee? $600 a month. The property tax? Another $300. You look at your paycheck. After the federal tax, the provincial tax, the CPP contributions, and the EI deductions, your great salary looks like a suggestion rather than a living wage. You realize that to buy that tiny glass box in the sky, you would need to spend 60% of your take-home pay on a mortgage for the next 30 years. This is the Canadian housing trap. For the last 20 years, Canada has abandoned the idea of a productive economy and replaced it with a real estate Ponzi scheme. In most healthy countries, people get rich by starting companies, inventing software, or manufacturing goods. In Canada, you get rich by sitting on a piece of dirt. Real estate and residential investment now account for a larger share of Canada's GDP than manufacturing or any other productive sector. Canada didn't learn from the 2008 crash in the United States. Canada looked at that disaster and used it as a blueprint. The government has effectively turned the Canadian dream into a landlord's paradise. Because the cost of housing is so high, all the capital in the country is dead. Instead of being invested in the next Google or a new factory, Canadian money is trapped in the walls of overpriced bungalows. This has created a generation of serfs. If you didn't buy a house before 2015, you are effectively paying a success tax to the generation that did. You are working 40 hours a week just to transfer your wealth to a baby boomer landlord who bought their house for $80,000 in 1982. This isn't a community, it's a feudal system with better branding. If the housing market doesn't drain your bank account, the Canadian oligopolies will finish the job. Let's talk about the big three. In Canada, 3 companies, Bell, Rogers, and Telus, control your phone and internet. 3 companies, Loblaws, Sobeys, and Metro, control your groceries. Two companies control your airlines. This is not a coincidence, it is a policy choice. Because of protectionist laws designed to keep American or international competitors out, Canadians pay the highest cell phone bills in the developed world. It is a literal tax on existence. You go to the grocery store, Loblaws for example, and you stare at a bag of grapes that costs $12. You see a block of cheese for $15. While the rest of the world has competition, Canada has managed stability, which is just a fancy term for protection racket. The government protects these cartels under the guise of Canadian identity or cultural sovereignty, but the only thing being protected is the profit margin of a few billionaire families. While Canadians were lining up at food banks in record numbers in 2024, these grocery giants were reporting record profits and being investigated for bread price fixing. This is the oligopoly cage. It squeezes the life out of the consumer, making the cost of living in Canada feel like a cost of breathing tax. When you live in Canada, you are a captured consumer. You pay more for airfare, more for milk, and more for banking fees than almost anyone in the G7. And then there is the great Canadian myth, free healthcare. For decades, Canadians used this to feel superior to Americans. We may not have the money, they said, but we have the care. But walk into a Canadian emergency room today. You will see people lying on gurneys in hallways for 24 hours. You will see wait times for a simple MRI that stretch into 6, 9, or 12 months. You will hear about people dying in waiting rooms from conditions that were treatable simply because there wasn't a bed or a doctor available. The system is free at the point of use, but it is bankrupt at the point of delivery. We have a shortage of 60,000 nurses. Millions of Canadians don't have a family doctor. But instead of fixing the system, instead of allowing innovation or competition, the Canadian government has introduced a terrifying solution, MAID, or Medical Assistance in Dying. What started as a compassionate choice for terminal patients has become a bureaucratic shortcut. Canada has become the world leader in state-sanctioned suicide. There are now documented cases of Canadians being offered MAID not because they are dying, but because they are poor, because they are disabled and can't find an accessible apartment they can afford, because they are depressed and the wait time for a psychiatrist is 2 years. When a government finds it easier to help its citizens die than to find them a doctor or a home, that country has lost its moral compass. The free healthcare system has become a lottery where the prize is just staying alive until your next appointment. This leads us to the great immigration bait-and-switch. Canada has always been a nation of immigrants, and for a long time it was the best at it. We took the best and the brightest. But in the last few years, the government flipped a switch. To keep the housing bubble from popping and to keep the grocer cartels supplied with low-wage labor, Canada opened the floodgates to a degree that is mathematically insane. In 2023, Canada added over 1 million people in a single year. For a country of 40 million, that is like the United States adding 9 million people in 12 months. Where do these people go? There are no houses for them, there are no doctors for them, so they end up in diploma mills, strip mall colleges that sell useless business diplomas as a backdoor to a work permit. You see the result in every city. 20 international students living in a single basement, sleeping in shifts, working for minimum wage at a fast food chain. This isn't diversity, it's human capital strip mining. It suppresses wages for Canadian workers, it drives rents to the moon, and it traps newcomers in a cycle of poverty. The Canadian dream is being sold to the world as a luxury product, but when the immigrants arrive, they find out they aren't the guests, they're the fuel.
Now, let's talk about why the economy feels like it's standing still. It's the productivity graveyard. If you look at the OECD projections for the next 30 years, Canada is expected to be the worst-performing advanced economy in the world, dead last. Why? Because we've stopped being a nation of doers and become a nation of rentiers. In Canada, it is almost impossible to build anything. You want to build a pipeline? Blocked. You want to build a mine for green minerals? Blocked. You want to build a 4-story apartment building? Blocked by a local council that thinks a shadow is a crime. We have become a nanny state on steroids. Business investment in Canada has been dead for a decade. Why would a Canadian entrepreneur start a tech company when they can just buy 3 condos in a suburb and make a 20% return with zero effort? Our capital is dead. It's locked in the walls of overpriced houses instead of being used to build the future. We are a G7 nation that is slowly de-skilling. We pump oil, we chop trees, and we rent basements to each other. That is not the recipe for a superpower. It's the recipe for a colony.
This leads to the great brain drain. If you are a high performer in Canada, a top-tier coder, a world-class surgeon, or a visionary engineer, Canada is a terrible place to be. You face a success ceiling. You earn 70 cents on the dollar compared to your American peers. You pay double the rent, and you pay 50% more in taxes. Every year, the elite exodus drains the country of its most valuable resource, human ambition. The people who should be building the next Shopify are moving to Texas, Florida, or Washington. They are taking their education, which the Canadian taxpayer subsidized, and they are giving the profits of their labor to the American economy. Canada is effectively a subsidized talent incubator for the United States. We pay for the childhood of geniuses, and then we make the country so expensive that they have no choice but to leave when they become productive. What remains is a bloated public sector. 1 in 4 workers in some provinces works for the government. We are a country of administrators administering the decline of other administrators.
Finally, we have to talk about the psychological toll, the polite repression. Canadians are famous for being nice, but that niceness has turned into a form of national gaslighting. There is a collective cognitive dissonance in Canada. People are working harder than ever, living in smaller spaces than ever, and seeing less of their paycheck than ever. Yet the national media and the government keep telling them that everything is fine because we have social cohesion. If you point out the flaws, you are labeled. If you point out the housing bubble, you're anti-immigrant. If you point out the healthcare failure, you're trying to destroy Canadian values. The anger is starting to boil over. You see it in the skyrocketing use of food banks by people with full-time jobs. Canadians are realizing that the social contract is void. The deal was, work hard, play by the rules, and you'll get a house and a middle-class life. That deal is dead. Canada is the canary in the north. It is a warning to the rest of the Western world about what happens when you stop valuing productivity and start valuing virtue signaling and asset inflation. Canada isn't just a country in a slump. It is a country that has lost its way. It is a wealthy nation that has decided to become poor by choice, 1 regulation and 1 housing bubble at a time. The postcard is beautiful, but the balance sheet is a disaster. The Canadian disease, the mix of high debt, low productivity, and real estate worship, is contagious. And by the time you realize you're infected, it might already be too late to save the dream. Canada used to be the land of the future. Now, it's a lesson in how to lose it.